A scratch is a disturbance on the body of analog film. A glitch is a disturbance on the body of a digital file. Both a scratch and a glitch are unwanted, but they're also both inevitable and unpredictable. And my book, which is a book about preserving and exhibiting cinema today, tries to think about what it means to exhibit films, to preserve films, in this triangle between what do we want, what do we not want, what is inevitable, what we can avoid, and what is predictable and what is unpredictable. I could also answer that I do not strive to present a coherent theory in this book because to a large extent, as I was writing this book, I was still thinking about many problems. So the book is basically a reflection of my thought process. And what I tried to do is I tried to take the existing theory and practice of film exhibition, of film preservation, and scratch it a little bit with a certain thought that is perhaps unorthodox or unexpected. I had two basic triggers. The first one was a very simple fact or a privilege that I had, and that is that I worked as a film curator or as a programmer of cinema, a curator of film exhibitions, if you want, in several different institutions, in several different countries, in different cultures. And I was quite simply astonished to see from up close how differently the idea of cinema and film preservation is perceived and practiced in different cultures. So I tried to write something that would try to make sense of all these different perspectives. And my other trigger was another very simple fact, and that is I believe that we live in a wonderful period when a lot of things are changing. We are witnessing a lot of fundamental changes when it comes to the way we experience moving images in general. And this book is an attempt to witness some of the changes that are happening. To be perfectly honest, I don't think that my book will be that interesting for a wider audience. I think that my core audience are people working in film archives. And I do sincerely hope that my audience among these people are not only film programmers, but also archivists, anybody who is in any way involved with film preservation and exhibition. But if somebody else from outside the field who cares about problems with preserving audiovisual culture picks up the book and reads it and finds it interesting, I will be happy. But to be honest, like I said, I don't think that my core audience is much wider than film archivists. Yeah, I chose to write the book in the form of short essays. Some of them are very short. And as I was writing it, I was perfectly well aware that I could take a certain subject that I'm tackling in an essay and extend it into something much longer. But I deliberately chose not to, for a very simple reason that what I tried to do was I tried to approach the idea of film history, the idea of film preservation from as many angles as possible. So what I'm trying in this book is I'm trying to cross the field of film preservation with science, ranging from chemistry to physics, poetry, sports, many different areas of, how shall I put it, I don't know, human activities, so to speak. I was basically just driven to go on and on and on and try to approach it from as many different angles as possible. And that was something that interested me more than just sticking to a certain angle and, you know, going really deep into one direction. Because also, if I would go really deep into a certain direction, I would perhaps have arrived at a conclusion. And that's something I did not want to do, because if there's one thing I can say about this book as a whole, is it does not present answers. It opens up questions, and that's it. And I really wanted to stay on the level of opening up questions and then letting people decide for themselves whether they want to pursue certain things further on their own or stay with an open question. I do talk about privilege a lot in the book. And again, the reason is very simple. We live in a world that is deeply affected by economic inequality. And economic inequality doesn't only affect our daily, I mean, it does affect our daily lives, but what does that mean? It affects everything. It affects science, it affects culture, it affects art, it affects everything. It affects film preservation. And that's something that we usually don't address when we talk about science, when we talk about art, when we talk about history. So what I try to do in my book is point out how many of the things that we talk about when we talk about standards, ideals, are actually deeply connected to privilege, to economic privilege. For example, here in Vienna, we have this immense privilege of being able to show films in their original format. So if something was shown on 35mm, we show it on 35mm. If something was originally shot on 16, we will show it in 16. And we say that this is our duty as a film museum, and it is. And we say that this is something that we should strive for now and forever, and that's also correct. But we should also be aware that this is a gigantic privilege. And it's a privilege that many, not only film museums and cinematheques, but you know, other institutions that are involved with cinema simply do not have. And that's only one element in which the idea of privilege is affecting what we do in film museums. And I was just trying to address that. Well, according to the latest scientific research, there is a deep, deep analogy between sex and digital technology. Allegedly, it leads to a much better sex. But we shall not say more. People will have to buy a book to learn more about that. I can give you a quick and simple answer and a longer answer. The simple answer would be, I think that file sharing is an incredibly intriguing technological invention that has deeply affected the times that we live in and the spread of film culture. And this is at the same time technology which remains deeply understudied and undervalued by the official film critical or film archivist discourse. So I'm trying to think about it a little bit because I think it deserves to be reflected properly. To give you a slightly longer answer, I think file sharing is fascinating because you can look at it as file sharing, but you can also look at it as a way of preserving digital files. And it's a way of preserving digital files that fully embraces the idea that the files will necessarily mutate, and it decentralizes preservation, because we always think of preservation as something that depends on these institutional centers that are the only, like nodal points that are capable of preserving things. But what if the true key to preserve things or whatever lies not in centralization? What if the key is somewhere else? And here file sharing is interesting because it basically spreads the idea, the responsibility among the entire community. And in the book I write about analogy between file sharing as a method of preserving and evolution as a very reliable method of preserving, you know, who we are, for example, over millennia. So it's a concept with, I think, vast and yet fully unexplored potential. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I do not have an ideal scenario of the cinema of the future. I don't even have any scenario of the cinema of the future. I'm just incredibly curious. And if there is one thing that I have learned when I was writing my book, is that I have eliminated scenarios from my head. I actually don't wish for anything. I'm just incredibly curious to see what will happen, and open, or at least I think I'm open to all possibilities. Like I said before, the book is a recording of my own process of exploration and learning, and basically everything I put in the book is there because I was surprised by it in one way or another. So I could take any chapter and find something in any chapter that was, at the time when I was writing it, surprising to me. Like, for example, I mean, you know, there's a chapter in which I write about how, because of this current pandemic, a lot of the institutions that used to be in the service of exhibiting films on the big screen have instantly transformed into streaming platforms. And that was a surprise to me. I was genuinely surprised that so many institutions that you know, should have been on a mission to preserve the idea of a public exhibition so quickly transform themselves into streaming services. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I was just surprised by their ability. And that in turn made me think that whatever happened during the pandemic was not surprising at all when it comes to the consumption, to use the ugly word, of moving images, because the trend has been going into the direction of our living rooms and away from the cinemas for decades now. So bottom line, I was surprised by everything, but nothing that would stick out as the single greatest surprise I have encountered. Maybe the relation between analog and sex. That was a huge surprise.